dare you touch my food? Never again!
I'm so sorry.
The plate landed on the floor with a sound that silenced the entire compound. Not dropped by accident, not slipped from tired fingers, thrown deliberately, with the full weight of contempt behind it. Favor watched the rice scatter across the concrete. The jollof rice she had woken up at 5 in the morning to cook. The rice she had stood over a hot fire to make, fanning the firewood with her wrapper while her back ached and her swollen feet throbbed inside her slippers. And she watched it spread across the ground in a red, wasted mess. And Flora stood over it with her arms crossed and her chin lifted and said, loud enough for the 3 neighbors by the fence to hear clearly, "Who told you to bring food to this table? Who asked you? You think because you are pregnant you can just walk into my kitchen and do as you like? Take your food and get out of my sight." Favor was 7 months pregnant. She had not eaten since the previous afternoon. She stood in the middle of the compound holding the now empty tray, her body swaying slightly from the effort of standing, her eyes burning, her lips pressed together so the cry would not escape and give Flora the satisfaction of seeing it. The neighbors by the fence were watching. Old Mama Titi, who always sat outside on her low stool, the new woman who had just moved into the Face Me I Face You at the end of the compound, and Clement, Flora's younger brother, who was leaning on the wall pretending to be on his phone but watching everything from under his eyebrows. Not one of them said a word. Favor bent down slowly, the way a heavily pregnant woman bends, carefully, painfully, and began picking up the plate from the ground. "Leave it," Flora snapped. "You will clean it later, after you have gone and sat down somewhere and remembered your place in this house." Favor straightened up. She looked at Flora, at the expensive Ankara blouse, at the freshly done hair, at the face of the woman her father had married 3 years after her mother died. The woman who had entered this house with promises and a big smile and had slowly, quietly dismantled every warm thing inside it. Then Favor looked past Flora to the corridor leading to the main sitting room where her father Bernard was sitting. She could see him from where she stood, sitting in his chair, his reading glasses on, his newspaper open in front of him. He had heard everything. The throw, the crack of the plate, Flora's voice cutting through the morning air. He turned the page of his newspaper. That was when Favor felt something die quietly in her chest. Not the hunger, not the shame of being watched by neighbors, not even the pain in her swollen feet. What died was the last small hope she had been holding, the one that said, maybe today he will say something, maybe today he will stand up. He turned another page. Favor placed the empty tray on the ground, straightened her wrapper over her belly, and walked back to the small room at the far end of the compound. The room that used to be a storage space. The room Flora had moved her into 18 months ago when she and Stanley returned from Lagos with empty hands and a growing belly and nowhere else to go. The room with the ceiling fan that hadn't worked in 3 months. The room that smelt of dust and old zinc and the particular silence of someone who has learned to stop asking for things. She sat on the thin mattress. Outside, she could hear Flora already instructing someone to come and mop the compound floor. Her voice returned to its usual domestic authority, as if throwing away a pregnant woman's food was just another morning task, done and finished. Favor placed both palms flat on her belly. Her baby moved, a slow roll, then a small kick, right under her left palm, like a knock. "I'm here, Mama. I'm still here." "I know," Favor whispered to her belly. "I know you are." She sat in the dust-smelling room with her hands on her stomach and her eyes dry now. No more tears. She had used them all. And she thought about how she had arrived here. Stanley had lost the job in Lagos after the company folded. They had tried for 2 months to hold on, selling things, borrowing, eating less and less until eating less became not eating. Until finally Stanley said, "Let us go back to your father's house, just for a few months until I find something." Just a few months. That was 8 months ago. In those 8 months, Flora had made the rules clear in the way that women like Flora make rules clear. Not with a written list, not with an open conversation, but with 100 small cruelties stacked on top of each other until the weight of them became the structure of your daily life. Favor did not eat with the family. Favor cooked, but did not dish for herself until Flora confirmed what was available. Favor's husband slept in the small room with her and was treated by Flora as invisible, acknowledged only when Flora needed something carried or fixed and otherwise erased. And the food. The food was the worst of it. Some days it came, late, small portions, served without looking at her. Some days it didn't come at all, and Favor would find a way. A biscuit from her bag, water, the remnant in the pot after everyone had eaten, scraped quietly at night when the house was sleeping. She had told Stanley. Stanley had said he would talk to Flora. That conversation had not happened because Stanley, like her father, had learned in this compound that silence was safer than confrontation, and he was choosing safety while his pregnant wife chose hunger. Favor sat on the mattress. Her stomach made a sound, long, hollow, urgent. She pressed her hand against it the way you press against a wound. "I will find something," she told her belly. "I will find us something today. I promise." She didn't know yet that today would be the day something found her first. She heard the knock on the back gate at 10 in the morning. She almost didn't answer it. She was lying on her side on the mattress, trying to ignore her hunger by sleeping, but the baby was restless and sleep wouldn't come. So when the knock came, soft but clear, 3 times, she got up slowly and shuffled to the back gate that opened to the narrow path behind the compound. She opened it. A woman stood there, older, perhaps 60, perhaps older. Dark skin with deep lines that looked earned, not aged, wearing a simple Ankara blouse and a wrapper, but wearing them the way certain women wear simple things, with a kind of settled elegance that told you comfort and money were not strangers to her. In her hands was a food flask, large, with multiple compartments, still steaming faintly from whatever was inside it. Favor stared at her. "Good morning, my daughter." The woman's voice was warm, unhurried. "My name is Mama Ruth. I just moved into the house across the road yesterday." She extended the flask slightly. "I made too much food this morning. I noticed you outside earlier and I thought..." She paused, her eyes dropping to Favor's belly and rising again with the careful gentleness of a woman who understood what she was looking at. "I thought perhaps you would like some." Favor's mouth opened. The first thing she felt was pride, the hot spiked pride of someone who does not want to be seen as someone who needs to be given food. The pride that tells you to say, "I'm fine, thank you, I'm fine," even when your stomach is eating itself. The words were forming, "I'm fine." Then her baby kicked, hard, right under her ribs, as if to say, "Don't you dare." Favor closed her mouth. She looked at the flask. Then she looked at the old woman's face, at the eyes that were not pitying but simply kind, steady and patient in the way of someone who was not here to embarrass you but simply to help, and something in her chest gave way, like a knot finally releasing. She took the flask. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected. "Eat inside softly, no need to explain anything to anyone." She turned and walked back toward the road. Favor closed the gate and went back to the small room. She opened the flask. Egusi soup, thick, fragrant, with stockfish and pongmo and scent leaves swimming in it. White rice, perfect. A small bag of chilled zobo on the side. She ate. And the moment the first spoonful hit her tongue, her face crumpled. Because food should not feel like mercy. Eating should not feel like being rescued. A pregnant woman in her own father's house should not be crying over a plate of rice because it is the first real meal she has had in over a day. She cried and she ate, and she held her belly with one hand, and she made herself a promise right there in that room that smelled of dust and injustice. This ends. Whatever it takes, this ends. She did not yet know that the old woman with the food flask was about to turn her entire story upside down, and she did not yet know that Flora, proud, untouchable, gold-earringed, was at the beginning of her worst mistake. Mama Ruth came back the next morning. And the morning after that. By the 4th day, it had become a quiet routine. Favor slipping out through the back gate at 9:30, after Flora had settled into her morning activities and the compound was distracted with its own noise. And Mama Ruth would be there, waiting, flask in hand, with the kind of punctuality that told you this was not casual charity, but a deliberate decision made by a woman who had decided something and intended to follow it through. They began to talk. Not deep talk, Not at first, just the surface things. Favor asking where Mama Ruth had come from, Mama Ruth asking about the pregnancy, how far along, whether she was attending antenatal. Small questions that slowly, over several mornings, became bigger ones. Favor found herself telling the old one things she had not told anyone. Not because she was weak, but because Mama Ruth listened in a way that rare people listen, without flinching, without rushing to give advice, without the uncomfortable look that people give you when your story makes them feel guilty for their own comfortable lives. She told her about Lagos, about how Stanley's company had folded overnight and the landlord had given them 2 weeks, about selling her good shoes and her handbag to pay for their bus back, about arriving at her father's compound with one suitcase between them and the hope that family meant safety. She told her about Flora, about the room, about the food, about the morning the plate was thrown in the compound in front of neighbors while her father sat with his newspaper. When she described that morning, Mama Ruth did not gasp or shake her head dramatically. She just said quietly, "And what did you feel in that moment?" Favor thought about it. "Smaller than I have ever felt," she said, "like I was not a person, like I was an inconvenience that had been given a body." Mama Ruth nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they have heard their own story in someone else's words. "Tell me," Favor said one morning as they sat on the low bench outside Mama Ruth's back door sharing a cup of tea, proper tea with milk, the kind Flora kept in the upper cupboard that Favor was not allowed to touch. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Mama Ruth wrapped both hands around her cup. 26 years ago, she said, I was pregnant. My first, Jason. She smiled at the name. My husband had just lost everything in a business that went wrong. We went to stay with his family. His aunt was the head of the household and she made it clear every single day that I was a burden and my pregnancy was an embarrassment. She paused. There was a woman in that neighborhood. I never knew her full name. She used to call herself Mama Chidi. Every morning she would leave food at our back gate. She never knocked loudly, never made it dramatic, just food, warm and gone before you could properly thank her. Favor was very still. I had Jason safely. My husband rebuilt slowly. We moved. Years passed. I never found Mama Chidi again. I tried. Mama Ruth looked at Favor steadily. I have carried that debt for 26 years, my daughter. I have been waiting every time I see a woman struggling to know, is this the one? Is this where I pay it back? She placed her cup down. When I drove into this street last week and I looked across the road and I saw you standing at that gate, 7 months pregnant, your face carrying every kind of tired, I knew. She said it simply, without drama. I knew. This was the one. Favor looked at the woman across from her, at this stranger who had become, in the space of 4 mornings and 4 meals, the most reliable presence in her world. You are a good woman, Mama Ruth, Favor said softly. I am a woman who was helped. There is a difference. I am just passing it along. She reached across and pressed Favor's hand once. Then she said something that Favor would not fully understand until much later. My son Jason is visiting this weekend. He is a doctor. I want him to see you. Favor frowned slightly. I'm fine. You are not fine, Mama Ruth said, not unkindly, just clearly. And I think a part of you knows that. Favor looked at her swollen feet, still pushed into slippers that were now too tight. She said nothing, because, yes, a part of her knew. The secret broke on a Thursday. Favor had come back from the gate with the flask, pepper soup that morning, the kind that sat in your chest like warmth, and had eaten and rinsed the flask and was hanging some baby things on the back line when Tommy the gateman came around the corner. He stopped, looked at the flask in her hand, looked at her face. She saw in his eyes the exact moment he decided what he was going to do with what he had just seen. That evening, she was in the room with Stanley when Flora's voice broke through the walls. Favor! Not a call, not a summons, a command, issued the way a court issues a sentence with the verdict already decided. Favor came out. Flora was standing in the center of the compound again. This time, there were more people. Mama Titi on her stool, Clement leaning on his car, two women from the next building who had come out under the pretense of fetching water. Flora's voice was public and deliberate. "You have been going to beg from strangers?" She let the word hang. Beg. "Behind this compound every morning, you are going to collect food from people outside, like a destitute, like someone with no family. You want to shame us? You want people on this street to say that we are the kind of people who starve a pregnant woman?" Favor looked at her stepmother. She thought about the scattered rice on the compound floor. She thought about the newspaper pages turning while she stood holding an empty tray. She thought about 4 mornings of eating in a stranger's doorway because it was the only place she was allowed to be hungry without being punished for it. And the last thread of tolerance in Favor snapped clean. "Flora." Her voice came out flat and steady, not shouting, steadier than shouting, the kind of voice that comes when you have moved past fear into something harder. "You have not fed me in this house. You threw my food on the floor in front of neighbors and walked away. I am 7 months pregnant and I have been surviving on whatever I can find because you control what comes out of that kitchen and I am not in your favor." She paused. "So yes, a woman who does not know me brought me food and I ate it and I will eat it again tomorrow because my baby is not going to pay for whatever war you are fighting with me." Complete silence. Not the restless silence of people waiting for the next line, the stunned silence of people who had expected the usual. Favor backing down, Favor apologizing, Favor shrinking. Flora's jaw tightened. "How dare you speak to me?" "I dare, because I have nothing left to lose in this house." She turned and walked back inside. Her entire body was shaking, but she walked straight. She did not stumble. She did not look back. Behind her, she heard the murmur of the compound women. Not Flora's voice now, the others. And what she heard in their murmur was not condemnation. It was the sound of people who had been watching quietly for a long time and had just seen the thing they were waiting to see. She was sitting on the mattress, hands trembling, when the door opened. Not Stanley, not Flora coming to continue. Her father. Bernard stood in the doorway. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His reading glasses were still on. He hadn't even taken them off. "Favor," he said. She looked at him. This man who used to call her my gold. "Don't," she said. Her voice was quiet. Don't come here now and do the face. Not today, Daddy." He came and sat beside her anyway. He sat and he looked at his hands and he didn't speak for a long time. Then, "I didn't know it had gotten this bad." Favor turned to look at her father. Really look. And she told him the truth. Not with cruelty, but fully. Every skipped meal, every locked cupboard, every morning of waking up and calculating what she could find before Flora noticed. The flask, the back gate, Mama Ruth and the pepper soup, and eating in a stranger's doorway because it was the only place she felt safe enough to be hungry without being punished for it. Bernard listened. His face did something complicated. When she finished, he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And Favor said, softly, sadly, with no anger left to sharpen it, "Daddy, I told you with my face every day. You told me with your newspaper." The silence after that sentence lasted a very long time. And inside that silence, Favor watched her father put his face in his hands. She did not comfort him, not because she was cruel, but because some truth need to be felt fully before they can be acted on. And she needed her father to feel this one all the way through. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, subscribe right now, because what Mama Ruth's son is about to discover about Favor's health is going to change everything, and Flora's world is about to crack from the inside out. Jason arrived on Friday evening. Favor saw him from the small window of her room, a tall man stepping out of a clean car, the kind of car that said he had worked for what he had. He carried a bag from a pharmacy and a small medical kit, and he moved like someone trained to be calm in rooms where other people were panicking. Saturday morning, Mama Ruth brought her across the road. It was the first time Favor had stepped inside another person's home in months, and the ordinariness of it struck her immediately. A clean sitting room, a couch that wasn't broken, curtains that matched, a ceiling fan that worked, and she had to blink against the sudden feeling in her throat because she had forgotten that houses could just be normal. Jason was professional and quiet. He set things up on the dining table, asked her to sit, began his checks. Blood pressure. He checked it twice without saying anything. He checked the position of the baby, asked about headaches, about vision, any blurring, any sudden flashes of light, about her feet. He looked at them when she stepped out of her slippers, and his expression did the thing that doctors' expressions do when they are controlling what they actually want to say. He asked about her diet. She told him. Not everything, enough. He wrote things down, then he put the pen down and looked at her directly. Favor, he said, your blood pressure is high, not at emergency level, but close to a threshold I am not comfortable with. He paused. You are showing early signs of preeclampsia. Do you know what that is? She shook her head. He explained it in the way good doctors explain things, plainly, without hiding the weight of it. A condition that could develop rapidly in the last months of pregnancy, dangerous to her, dangerous to the baby, triggered and worsened by stress, poor nutrition, inadequate rest. If this escalates, he said carefully, it can become life-threatening for you and for the child. The room was very quiet. Mama Ruth, sitting in the chair to the side, pressed her hand over her mouth. Favor sat with her hands in her lap and felt something cold move through her. Not panic, something more serious than panic. The cold clarity of someone who has just understood exactly how close to the edge they have been standing without knowing it. What do I do? She asked. You eat properly, every meal, every day. You rest, real rest, not lying awake worrying. You eliminate the source of stress on your body as much as possible. He looked at her steadily, which means the situation you are currently living in is a medical problem, not just a family problem, a medical one. Favor looked down at her belly. She thought about the plate of food scattered on the compound floor. She thought about every morning she had woken up calculating whether there was anything left in the pot. She thought about the broken fan and the dust and the sound of Flora's laughter carrying clearly from the main house while she lay in the dark trying to sleep through hunger. She needs to come and stay here, Mama Ruth said. She said it to Jason, but she was looking at Favor. I have already decided. I have the room, I have the food, and she turned to Favor fully. I want you here, you and Stanley, until after this baby is safely delivered. Favor opened her mouth. The pride rose up again, automatic, trained. I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to owe anyone. I can manage. I have always managed. Jason spoke quietly. Favor. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing a person can do, especially when a life that is not yours yet depends on the choice. She looked down at her belly. She felt her baby move, slow, soft, trusting her to make the right decision. Okay, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Okay. Going back to pack her things was the hardest walk she had taken in a long time. Not because she was sad to leave. She was not sad. She was terrified, not of leaving, but of passing through the compound one last time with her bags and her husband and her belly, walking out in front of Flora and the neighbors and whoever else was watching, and she knew Flora would make it a scene because Flora always made things scenes. She told Stanley when she got back to the room. She had been afraid he would resist, that we couldn't accept charity, that he would make it complicated. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, and what she saw on his face was not resistance. It was shame, the particular shame of a man who has known he was failing his wife and has been sitting inside that knowledge and doing nothing about it. Tell me what to pack, he said. They were ready in 40 minutes. They had so little that 40 minutes was almost too much time. Flora was in the compound when they came out with the bags. Of course she was. She had positioned herself near the main door. Fresh blouse, gold earrings, arms folded. The performance was fully prepared. So, you are leaving? Favor stopped in front of her. She looked at Flora one long final time. I am not leaving. I am choosing. She walked through the gate. She heard her father's voice behind her, low, serious, a voice she had not heard him use in 4 years. Flora, come inside right now. We need to talk. She did not turn around. She did not need to see it. She just walked forward, her husband beside her, her baby rolling gently inside her, towards the house across the road where a woman who owed her nothing had decided to give her everything. What Favor did not know when she walked out of that gate was that she was leaving at the exact moment Flora's carefully constructed world was beginning to come apart at the seams. And she had built the seams herself with her own hands over 4 years of quiet theft. Bernard had not been an oblivious man. He had been a tired man, a grieving man who had married too quickly after losing his wife and found himself 4 years later in a house that no longer felt like his own, but did not know how to reclaim it without setting everything on fire. So he had shrunk. He had gone quiet. He read his newspaper. But the morning Favor had stood in the compound and said, "Daddy, I told you with my face every day. You told me with your newspaper." Something in Bernard had cracked open. He had not slept that night. He had lain beside Flora in the dark and gone one by one through the 4 years, the things he had seen and explained away. The way Favor's portion was always smaller. The move to the back room, just temporarily, Flora had said. The morning he had had a plate break and had turned a page of his newspaper because he did not want to see what was on the other side of knowing. He had lain in the dark and understood that cowardice dressed as peacekeeping is still cowardice. And then, because God or faith or guilt works in its own time, 2 days after Favor left, a call came from his accountant. The joint account that he and Flora managed for household expenses, the one Flora handled because "you are always busy, Bernard, just let me manage it, it is easier that way," had a withdrawal history that Bernard had never been shown. 4 years of withdrawals. Amounts that did not match any bill, any household purchase, any expense he could account for. 300,000 naira, then 500, then transfers that bore the name of Flora's younger brother, Clement, always smiling, always leaning on a wall Clement, who somehow always had a new phone. Bernard called his lawyer that same afternoon. In Mama Ruth's house, Favor knew none of this. What she knew was the feeling of waking up in a clean room with a working fan and finding breakfast already on the table when she came out. Eggs, bread, tea, fruit. Real fruit, the kind that hadn't gone soft. She knew what it felt like to eat until she was full and then sit back and not feel guilty about it. She knew the feeling of Stanley leaving every morning for the new job, small, steady work arranged through Mama Ruth's network, a logistics company that paid on time, and coming back in the evenings tired but not defeated. She knew the feeling of Jason calling every few days, checking her blood pressure numbers, and the quiet relief in his voice each time they were lower than the week before. She knew the feeling of Mama Ruth sitting with her in the evenings, the two of them on the veranda, and talking, sometimes about serious things, sometimes about nothing, the way women talk when they are simply keeping each other company. One evening, Favor asked, "Mama Ruth, do you think Flora is a bad person?" Mama Ruth considered this carefully. She did not answer quickly like people answer when they have not really thought about the question. "I think," she said finally, "that some people confuse power with safety. They make themselves dangerous to other people because they are afraid of what will happen if they are not the most powerful person in the room." She paused. "That does not excuse it, but it explains it." "I don't hate her," Favor said, and she was surprised to find it was true. "I thought I did, but I don't. I just don't want to be near her." "That is the healthiest thing I have heard you say," Mama Ruth replied. Favor laughed. It was a small laugh, rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a while. But it was real. 3 weeks after Favor moved out, the compound across the road went through something that the street will talk about for months. Favor heard pieces of it from Mama Titi, who had taken to stopping at Mama Ruth's gate on her evening walk to share what she had seen. Bernard had confronted Flora about the money. Flora denied it, then explained it, then wept, then threatened to leave. Bernard, to the shock of everyone who had watched him shrink quietly for 4 years, said with a calm that Mama Titi described as the calm of a man who has made his decision and locked it somewhere Flora cannot reach, that if she left, he would not stop her. Flora screamed. Then she packed. Then Mama Titi delivered this part with wide eyes. She unpacked because her family in Benin had told her she was on her own and she had nowhere to go that night. She knocked on Clement's door. Clement, who had received money from that account for 4 years, told his sister he was sorry, but he had his own problems. Flora slept in the main bedroom of a house that felt completely different from every house she had ever controlled, because the man who had allowed her to control it had quietly, firmly, and completely withdrawn the permission. Favor had all of this and felt nothing dramatic. No celebration, no satisfaction that arrived in a blaze, just something slow and settling, like a scale returning to level. She pressed her hands to her belly. You almost didn't make it, she told her daughter. She was certain now it was a daughter, not by scan, but by the particular way the baby moved, unhurried and deliberate, like someone who already knew exactly what she was doing. Her baby shifted inside her, rolling over slowly, getting ready. Labor started on a Tuesday evening. It began as a low pressure, the kind Favor had been feeling for 2 weeks that Jason had told her to time carefully and call him the moment they were 10 minutes apart. She timed them, she called him. He was calm on the phone, she was calm. Mama Ruth was not calm, but performed calm because Favor needed it from her. Stanley drove them to the clinic, a proper private clinic, paid for by Mama Ruth, without discussion, without making it a moment of charity, simply arranged the way Mama Ruth arranged things, with quiet competence and zero fanfare. It was 11 hours. 11 hours of pain that Favor would later describe not as the worst thing she had ever felt, but as the most purposeful. Pain that was building towards something. Pain that had a reason, which made it entirely different from the other kind of pain she had been living inside for years. The purposeless kind, the kind that just takes and gives nothing back. At 4:17 in the morning, in a clean room that smelt of antiseptic and something floral from the air freshener on the windowsill, a sound filled the air. Small, furious, completely certain of itself. A girl. They placed her on Favor's chest, and Favor looked down. She had prepared herself, in the way pregnant women prepare themselves, for the moment. She had imagined it. She had thought she knew what it would feel like. She had not known. She had not known that a face that small could already look that certain, that the first expression a person makes in the world could already contain so much character, brow furrowed, mouth wide, voice absolutely committed to being heard. She had not known that she would feel the crack in her chest that had been there for years simply close, quietly, like a door being shut gently in a room that no longer needed to be locked. Stanley was crying. He had stopped pretending not to at some point during the last 3 hours of labor and had simply cried openly, and nobody had commented on it, because some moments are bigger than dignity. Mama Ruth stood at the edge of the room with both hands pressed over her mouth and her eyes completely full. "What is her name?" the nurse asked. Favor looked at her daughter, at the small fists, at the furious, beautiful face. She looked across the room at Mama Ruth. "Chidinma," she said. The room went still. Mama Ruth's hands dropped from her mouth. She started. Her voice failed. She tried again. "Chidinma." That was her name. Mama Chidi's full name. Chidinma. She pressed her hand to her chest. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Favor said. She looked at her daughter. "I just knew." Some things do not need explaining. Some names travel through time in ways that logic cannot chart and coincidence cannot fully account for. A name passed through a fence 26 years ago in a bowl of soup, carried forward through a woman who never forgot her debt, arriving now in a compound across the road, written on the face of a baby born at 4 in the morning to a mother who had almost not survived long enough to deliver her. Chidinma. God is good. Bernard came to the clinic that same morning. He had heard from Stanley at 6 a.m. and driven there immediately, arriving with his hat in his hands and his eyes red from what was clearly a night of no sleep. Not a night spent worrying about Favor's delivery because he hadn't known, but a night spent inside himself, inside everything that had been sitting there since the afternoon his daughter had told him he was seeing with his newspaper. He sat beside Favor's bed and looked at her granddaughter for a long time without speaking. Then, the baby gripped his finger. That small, automatic grip that newborns have. The grip that is not yet conscious choice, but is already absolute. And Bernard made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. Low, broken, the kind that comes from the part of a man words cannot reach. "Daddy," Favor said. He looked up at her. "She needs you," Favor simply said. "She needs to know her grandfather. So you are going to have to be the man she deserves, not the man you were in that house for 4 years. She held his eyes. "You understand me?" Bernard nodded. He could not speak, but he did not look away.
Flora left the compound 2 weeks after Favor delivered. Not in dramatic ending, no screaming exit, no fire. She packed her things into Clement's car, Clement who had come back, tail between his legs, to help his sister leave, and she drove away on a quiet morning while the street was still waking up. The neighbors watched from behind curtains. Mama Titi watched from her stool. Nobody stopped her. Nobody performed sadness. The gate closed. The compound went quiet. And that was the end of it. The end of 4 years of a woman who entered a house with a big smile and slowly, methodically, made it too small for anyone else to breathe. Not with a dramatic fall, not with public humiliation, just with the quiet, irrevocable consequence of being exactly who she had chosen to be, until the people she had counted on staying silent found their voices, one by one, starting with a daughter who stood in a compound holding an empty tray and decided she was done being small. On a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after Chidinma was born, Favor sat on the veranda of Mama Ruth's house. The baby was strapped to her chest in a wrapper, the same pale yellow wrapper her own mother used to wear, the one she had kept at the bottom of her bag through everything, through Lagos and the bus ride and the months in the back room. Never used, just kept. Today, she had taken it out. It felt right. Chidinma was asleep on her, small and warm, breathing the slow, absolute breath of a baby who has no reason yet to doubt that the world is a safe place. The street was doing its Saturday things. A man washing his car 2 houses down, children chasing each other around the compound gate across the road, the smell of someone frying akara drifting over the fence from somewhere nearby. Favor sat in the morning sun and felt ordinary. Not the performed ordinary of someone pretending everything is fine, real ordinary, the ordinary of a life that has found its level again, the ordinary of enough food, enough rest, enough love, enough of the things that are easy to take for granted until they are taken away. Mama Ruth came out and sat beside her. They did not speak immediately. They sat the way 2 people sit who have said the important things and now have the luxury of silence. After a while, Mama Ruth said, "Are you happy, my daughter?" Favor thought about it honestly, not the quick answer, the true one. "I am at peace," she said. "I think peace comes first. Happy follows." Mama Ruth nodded. "That is wisdom." Favor looked at the baby on her chest, at the small face, relaxed in sleep, utterly trusting. She pressed her lips to the top of Chidinma's head, felt the warmth there, the aliveness, the absolute present tense miracle of a person who had almost not made it, not because the world had been too cruel, though it had been cruel enough, but because one woman had decided to put food over a gate, and another woman had, at the very last moment, chosen to take it. We made it, she thought, because someone remembered us, and now we will remember someone else. She already knew, somewhere certain and quiet, that this was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the version she was meant to tell. The version where Chidinma grew up in a house with enough and learned from her mother that receiving grace is not weakness, and learned from her grandmother Ruth that passing grace forward is not charity, it is the honest response to having been saved. The morning went on around them, simple, ordinary, full. Chidinma breathed, in, out. Favor held her, and the world was, for this moment, exactly enough.